They told you the Ottoman Empire fell on battlefields, that armies defeated it, that military conquest ended 6 centuries of imperial power. They lied. The Ottoman Empire didn't fall to superior force. It fell to superior accounting. Not to cannons, but to creditors. Not to invasions, but to interest payments. 1881. European bankers entered Istanbul. Not with soldiers, with ledgers, with legal documents, with debt contracts. They didn't conquer the empire. They foreclosed on it, took direct control of Ottoman tax collection, seized customs revenues, appropriated state monopolies. Not through military occupation, through financial administration. The Ottoman flag still flew. The Sultan still sat on his throne. The empire technically remained sovereign, but the treasury belonged to foreign creditors. The budget was written by European accountants. The revenue flowed to Paris and London before it reached Istanbul. This was conquest without invasion, occupation without armies, the first modern debt colonization, and the blueprint for every IMF intervention that followed. This is finance through time. And this is how empires fall when they forget that balance sheets matter more than battlefields, how debt becomes occupation, how bankruptcy becomes colonization, and how the system invented to destroy the Ottomans still destroys nations today. 1854. The Crimean War, Ottoman Empire fighting Russia, needs funding. Turns to European banks. Borrows £3 million sterling at 6% interest from British and French creditors. First external sovereign debt in Ottoman history. Seemed reasonable. The money would modernize the military, fund infrastructure, build railways and telegraphs, finance the transition to modern statehood. Except that's not what happened. The money didn't go to productive investment, didn't build factories, didn't create industries, didn't generate future revenue streams that could service the debt. It went to war, to immediate consumption, to funding military operations that produced nothing except more need for funding. And European powers encouraged this, wanted the Ottomans in debt, not to destroy them yet, to control them, keep them as a buffer against Russian expansion, keep them dependent, keep them borrowing. Because debt creates leverage, creates influence, creates the ability to dictate terms without firing shots. So the borrowing continued. More loans, bigger amounts, higher interest rates. The money kept flowing in and kept flowing out. Not to productive capacity, to palaces, to prestige projects, to Sultan Abdulaziz's extravagant construction programs, to consumption that generated no economic return, to spending that created no capacity to repay. This is the trap. Borrowing for consumption rather than production, taking debt that doesn't generate revenue to service itself, creating obligations that compound faster than capacity to meet them. The mathematics are inexorable. When debt grows faster than productive capacity, collapse is inevitable, just a matter of time. By 1873, the situation was catastrophic. Ottoman government revenue, half went to interest payments, not to running the state, not to providing services, not to maintaining infrastructure, just servicing existing debt. Paying interest to foreign creditors before any other government function received funding. This is unsustainable. Obviously unsustainable. Everyone knew it. The Ottomans knew it. The creditors knew it. But nobody wanted to admit it because admission triggers collapse. So they pretended, kept borrowing, kept paying, kept hoping something would change, that revenue would increase, that debt would stabilize, that the mathematics would somehow work out. They didn't. Mathematics doesn't care about hope. By 1875, total Ottoman debt reached £200 million sterling, approximately $30 billion in modern terms. Revenue couldn't cover it, not even close. The empire faced a choice, default or collapse. Actually, those were the same choice, just different words for identical outcomes. October 1875, the Ottoman Empire declared bankruptcy, suspended debt payments, announced it could not meet obligations. First major sovereign default of the modern era. Ramadan Decree, the decree that admitted what everyone already knew. The empire was insolvent. The debts couldn't be paid. The system had failed. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was predictable, inevitable even. When you borrow for consumption, not production. When debt compounds faster than revenue. When half your income goes to interest before anything else. The mathematics guarantee failure. The only variable is timing. But here's where it gets interesting, where the real conquest begins. Because the default wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something new, something insidious, financial occupation. The creditors could have written off the debt, accepted losses, moved on. They didn't. They saw opportunity, not for repayment, for control, for something more valuable than money, for sovereignty itself. 1881, Muharrem Kararnamesi, the decree that restructured Ottoman debt, created the Düyun-u, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. Sounds bureaucratic, sounds like reasonable financial management. It was actually surrender, transfer of sovereignty without military defeat, occupation without invasion. Here's what the decree actually did. gave European creditors direct control over Ottoman revenue sources, not just claims on revenue, direct operational control. Europeans took over tax collection in designated provinces, ran customs administration, managed state tobacco and salt monopolies, collected the money directly, sent it to creditors first. Whatever remained, if anything, went to the Ottoman treasury. This wasn't advice, this wasn't oversight, this was operational control. Foreign nationals sitting in Ottoman ministries, writing Ottoman budgets, collecting Ottoman taxes, making Ottoman fiscal policy. The empire remained technically independent. The Sultan remained nominally in charge, but the money flowed through foreign hands, and whoever controls the money controls the state. The Düyun-u had its own buildings, its own staff, thousands of European administrators working inside the Ottoman Empire, not as advisors, as controllers, as the actual fiscal authority. They decided budgets, they allocated resources, they determined what the empire could spend, and on what, and when. The Ottoman government couldn't override them, couldn't ignore them, couldn't operate independently, because the Düyun-u controlled the revenue, and without revenue the state doesn't function, can't pay soldiers, can't maintain infrastructure, can't operate at all, so the Ottomans had to comply, had to accept foreign control, had to become a debt colony. This is conquest through accounting, occupation through administration. The flag remained Ottoman, the territory remained Ottoman, but the fiscal sovereignty was European, and fiscal sovereignty is real sovereignty. Everything else is theater. The system worked perfectly. For the creditors, they got paid, got more than paid, got control, got influence, got the ability to shape Ottoman policy, to ensure favorable terms for European trade, to maintain access to Ottoman markets, to prevent independent Ottoman development that might threaten European interests. And it was all legal, all contractual. The Ottomans agreed, signed the documents, accepted the terms, because the alternative was complete collapse, was isolation from international finance, was inability to function as a modern state. So they chose controlled collapse over chaotic collapse, chose managed occupation over anarchic failure. But the choice wasn't really theirs. The choice was made years earlier, when they borrowed for consumption, when they prioritized palaces over production, when they let debt compound beyond sustainable levels. The 1881 occupation was just the inevitable conclusion. The mathematical endpoint of choices made decades before. The Ottoman Empire limped along for another 40 years, maintained the appearance of sovereignty, but the substance was gone. The fiscal independence was lost. The ability to chart independent course was eliminated. The empire had become a debt colony, technically independent, functionally controlled, sovereign in name only. World War I finished what debt started. Military defeat completed financial defeat. But the empire was already dead, already hollowed out, already reduced to administrative fiction. The battlefields just made official what the balance sheets had accomplished years earlier. This story didn't end with the Ottomans. The system survived, evolved, became doctrine, because it worked. Proved that conquest through debt is cheaper than conquest through war, quieter, more sustainable, more profitable, and more acceptable to modern sensibilities that frown on overt imperialism. International Monetary Fund, World Bank, structural adjustment programs, austerity measures, debt restructuring that requires policy changes, budget oversight by international institutions. Sound familiar? This is the Düyun-u model. Updated, refined, globalized but functionally identical. Greece, required to accept EU fiscal oversight, required to implement austerity, required to privatize assets, required to accept policy direction from foreign creditors in exchange for debt restructuring, for continued access to finance, for avoiding complete collapse. The choice presented as voluntary, the coercion disguised as assistance. Latin America, Argentina, IMF programs requiring specific policy implementations, requiring budget controls, requiring structural reforms, in exchange for loans, for debt relief, for avoiding default. The program sold as development aid, the reality being fiscal control. Being sovereignty, transfer in exchange for financial stability. Africa, debt relief programs requiring governance changes, requiring market reforms, requiring policy alignment with creditor preferences. The language about partnership and development, the substance being conditional sovereignty, being independence that's dependent on following instructions from those who hold the debt. The system is everywhere, operating continuously, creating debt dependencies, converting those dependencies into policy control, using financial pressure to achieve what military pressure cannot, to shape governments, to direct development, to maintain influence, all through mechanisms that look voluntary, that appear contractual, that seem like mutual agreements between equal parties, except they're not equal. Debtor and creditor are never equal. One needs something the other has. One faces collapse if terms aren't met. One can walk away, the other cannot. And that asymmetry creates leverage, creates control, creates occupation without armies, colonization without conquest. This is finance through time. We follow the money to show you that empires fall from balance sheets before they fall from battlefields. In 1881, the Düyun-u directly seized Ottoman tax collection. Today, modern states spend half their budgets on interest payments. Do you think the IMF and global creditors are just modern versions of the Düyun-u? Is the new form of occupation debt-based? Let's discuss in the comments.